There are moments in life when a mother's whispered prayer feels like it disappears into the ceiling. Moments when she wonders if God is listening at all. For Maria, those moments came more often than she ever expected. She used to believe she was strong enough to carry her 2 children, strong enough to survive the long nights at the hospital with her youngest, strong enough to keep smiling even when her world felt like it was falling apart one piece at a time. But life has a way of revealing how fragile we truly are. And sometimes, the greatest strength isn't the one we hold, but the one we discover when everything else collapses. Maria's story began on a cold November evening. Her daughter, Lily, had been sick for weeks, fever, exhaustion, strange symptoms the doctors couldn't explain. Nights stretched long and heavy, the kind that make a mother pray with trembling hands. And as the sun sank beyond the horizon that night, Maria sat on her kitchen floor, her back against the cabinet, her hands covering her face, whispering the same words over and over. God, please give me strength. It wasn't a dramatic prayer. It wasn't loud. It wasn't poetic. It was the kind of prayer that slips out of a soul too tired to search for better words. But here is the question, the kind that echoes in the hearts of mothers everywhere. What happens when the strength we beg for never seems to come? And what if? What God gives us instead is something deeper, something far greater than what we thought we needed. That night, after tucking Lily into bed, Maria finally allowed herself to cry. Not because she was weak, but because she'd been strong for far too long. She stood by the window, staring out at the quiet street, and wondered if God had grown tired of hearing her voice. She wondered if her prayers had somehow become too small, too insignificant to reach heaven. But God has a way of moving long before we notice, and He often answers in ways we never expect. The next morning arrived heavy and gray. Lily's breathing was shallow, her skin pale. Maria felt her heart tighten with a fear she hadn't dared to acknowledge. She called the hospital, grabbed her keys, carried her daughter into the car, and whispered the same trembling prayer with every breath she took. Lord, strength, please, just strength. But in the quiet stillness of that car ride, with her daughter's head resting against her shoulder, another question rose, one she tried to push away. What if strength isn't enough? What if what she truly needed was something entirely different? When they arrived, nurses rushed Lily inside. Machines beeped, lights flashed, and Maria was left standing in the hallway with trembling hands and a heart full of fear. She clung to the railing beside her, struggling to steady her breath. Everything inside her felt like it was unraveling. Minutes passed, maybe hours. She couldn't tell anymore. And then when she felt the last thread of strength slipping through her fingers, something unexpected happened. A nurse stepped out of the room and placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Are you Lily's mother?" she asked softly. Maria nodded. The nurse smiled a small, warm smile that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Your daughter is fighting," she said. "But she's not fighting alone. You did the right thing bringing her in today. You saved her." Maria froze. "You saved her." She hadn't been expecting those words. In that moment, God whispered something to her heart, quiet, gentle, undeniable. "You asked for strength, but I'm giving you purpose." Maria didn't understand it fully yet. She didn't know why those words struck so deeply, or why her knees nearly buckled beneath her. But somewhere inside, she felt something shift, something awaken, something far greater than strength. And little did she know, God was only beginning to reveal what He had planned for her. The nights grew longer for Maria, and the silence inside her home became heavier than anything she had ever carried. She tried to act strong for her son, who watched her with wide, worried eyes whenever she coughed or struggled to stand. It was strange, she thought, how a mother could spend her entire life holding her child. Yet in moments like these, it was the child who held her together. But she didn't want him to know that. She didn't want him to sense how afraid she truly was. Every day felt like a test of her patience, her hope, her endurance, and her faith. And every night felt like a battle against thoughts she never dared to speak out loud. What if this illness takes her away? What if her son grows up without the one person who always prayed over him, always whispered hope into his life? Those questions haunted her, slipping into her mind like shadows under a closed door. She tried to pray with confidence, but sometimes her voice sounded like a woman pretending to be strong, not a woman who actually was. Still, she prayed. And each time she did, she wondered if heaven had heard a whisper that soft. One evening, after another exhausting day, she sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling from weakness. She felt her heart thudding too slowly, as if it had grown tired of fighting too. Her son was in the next room trying to sleep, but she knew he wasn't. She could feel his fear from across the hallway, the way he kept peeking in to check if she was still breathing, still okay, still strong enough to smile. She hated that. Not because of him, never because of him, but because she wanted him to feel safe, not terrified. So she sat there and whispered a question she had never allowed herself to ask before. God, what if I'm not strong enough for this? The words didn't feel like doubt. They felt like honesty, something she had avoided for too long. Her eyes filled with tears she hadn't cried in months, because she had been too busy trying to convince the world she was fine. But the truth stood quietly beside her now. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and terrified of what the next morning might bring. And still, the room stayed silent. It bothered her more than she expected the silence. It made her feel like she was praying into an empty space, into a sky too distracted to notice one small mother and her small, frightened son. She clenched her hands together and whispered again, but this time her voice broke. God, are you still here? Are you still listening? That night, her body gave out before her hope did. She fainted in the hallway, the sound of her fall echoing through the house like a warning. Her son woke immediately and ran to her side, shaking her, crying, begging her to respond. But she couldn't. Her world had gone dark. The strength she tried to hold on just slipped right out of her hands. They rushed her to the hospital, sirens cutting through the night, flashing red and white against the windows of the ambulance. Her son held her hand the entire way, his small fingers wrapped around hers, refusing to let go. He prayed harder than he had ever prayed in his life. God, please don't take her. Please don't take my mom. In the emergency room, monitors beeped in uneven rhythm, and doctors rushed around her, calling orders, checking vitals, doing everything they could. But to her son, everything felt like a blur, a terrifying blur where people moved quickly, but time itself refused to move at all. And in the middle of it, Maria, somewhere between consciousness and darkness, felt only a heaviness pressing against her chest, as if life was slowly slipping out of reach. She tried to breathe, tried to speak, tried to pray, but nothing came out. Just silence. Yet sometimes, she would later learn, silence does not mean God is absent. It means he is preparing something deeper than what we asked for. Because while she lay there, weak and fading, something unseen began to unfold. Not strength, not yet. Something greater, something she had never dared to ask for. Something she didn't even know she needed. As the weeks passed, something began to shift inside her, slowly, quietly, almost undetectably at first. The pain in her body didn't vanish overnight, and the weight of responsibility didn't lift in an instant. But the mother who once trembled now found herself standing longer, breathing steadier, praying deeper. She realized that God had not answered her prayer with the strength she imagined, but with a strength that transformed her from the inside out. Each morning, she woke before the sun, not out of fear, but out of trust. She would sit by the small window near her kitchen, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, whispering, Lord, thank you for another day. And somehow, those words didn't feel fragile anymore. They felt like foundations. Her children noticed it too. The light in her eyes sharpened, the weariness in her shoulders softened, and though she still moved slowly, she radiated a calm that wrapped around the whole household. And then one night, days after another exhausting doctor's appointment, weeks after countless prayers whispered into tear-soaked pillows, something happened that shook her heart in a way she never expected. She was tucking her youngest son into bed when he placed his tiny hand on hers and whispered, "Mom, I see you trying. I know you're hurting, but you're the strongest person I've ever met." Her breath caught. Tears rose instantly, not because she believed she was strong, but because she finally realized that God's answer had been unfolding through every moment she thought he was absent. She knelt beside her son's bed and held his small hands in her trembling ones. In that stillness, she felt something warm wash over her, a peace deeper than understanding, a reassurance stronger than fear. It was as if God himself whispered, "My daughter, you asked me for strength, but I gave you more than strength. I gave you resilience. I gave you wisdom. I gave you a heart that endures. I gave you the ability to rise even when the world pushes you down. I gave you the kind of strength that carries generations." Her tears spilled freely now, but they were different, no longer tears of exhaustion, but tears of release, tears of realization, tears of gratitude. She understood now. God had never ignored her prayers. He had been answering them every single day, just not in the dramatic way she once expected. And the miracle became even clearer in the following days. Her older daughter began praying again quietly, at first, then boldly. Her teenage son, who once shut himself away, now stayed beside her longer, asking how he could help. The home that once felt heavy with stress now felt lighter, softer, filled with a sense of unity she didn't remember feeling before. One evening, as she sat on the edge of her bed, she looked around her room, noticing the stack of unpaid bills, the medications on her nightstand, the responsibilities still waiting for her. And yet, she didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt carried. She realized God had not removed her battles. He had strengthened her through them. Not with the strength she prayed for, but with the strength she needed, something deeper, something unshakable, something sacred. For the first time in months, she lifted her head and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for giving me more than what I asked for." And in that whisper, she felt a presence settle beside her, gentle, comforting, undeniable. A reminder she had never walked alone. Not once, not even in her weakest moment.